Hello everyone, Melvin here. Today I'm going to do a quick tutorial for you on basically how to do a quick and dirty Rimlight for a costume, an existing costume. Now, if you're more patient than me, you can actually go through each material and shader and actually figure out how to properly add the texture reference and the steps to the shader that actually emulate it. And I mean, when you think about it, it's really not that hard. You basically just examine the stages and figure out which ones control, basically figure out what controls what here, and just add it to your existing shaders. But I'm lazy, so I don't do that. This can cause problems because usually materials and shaders are actually unique to the pack that you're taking it from, or the costume file, whatever you want to call it. But in this case, you know, a dirty little secret here, but Smash 3 reused a lot of the same materials and shaders for our stuff. I mean, maybe somebody will be mad at me for sharing that information, but whatever, it doesn't matter. So from here I've got Meta Knight, Smash 3 Meta Knight. Look at those nice glove, that glove armor though. Oof. Basically, what you want to do is you're going to be taking an existing material and shader, or rather, the material and its accompanying shader. You're going to export these. So this one has 4 texture references, which means that it has the regular diffuse, obviously. It has the specular map, the mask, the projected texture, and the edge, which is for the rim light. So this is if you want a specular. If you don't, you can actually just export one that doesn't have it set up. So we just have the diffuse and the edge. So for our instance, I've actually already exported them here, 2-step and 4-step, 2-step being no spec, 4-step being spec'd. And yeah, so basically you want to export all that. And once you have it all exported and properly named, you also want to export your specular texture if your pack doesn't already have one. This one already does, called spec, it's got one, so it doesn't need that. And you also want to export your edge, so Control E, save, sure. So then you're done with that. You can minimize that for now. And from here, I'm going to show you 2 things. Basically, all of these are already set up, just because I've done this a few times now. But basically the gist is to press Control R for your materials and replace them like so. So basically, I got the body here. You take your material. Now when you replace it, you'll notice that it actually has the texture reference names as the same ones rather as the material or the pack that you took them from. So all you have to do here is press Control N and rename it to whatever your actual texture path names are. So in our case, it's body spec and spec. There we go. So now that's all properly set up there. So alongside this, you want to make note of what shader this material is using and also replace the shader. I've already done so, but I'll do it again as just as an example. So Control R, 4-step shader. There we go. Now it's almost done. Last step, we just want to check our specular and our edge and make sure that the texture matrices, right up here, this first option, for anything that follows the camera, aka your projected textures being the spec and the edge in literally every scenario. If you're like some kind of wizard, it might be different, but you want these to set to true, if possible. Sometimes, for example, like this, it doesn't set, which is fine. It's the same effect. It'll work in game. You want these set to true, and then anything that has a UV map, basically. So if you're in version 77, and you know you can see your UVs and your texture and your misaligned texture. Oof, yikes! You want that set to false. Same for the specs, for the spec mask. So you can minimize all that. So basically, I set this up for the previous tutorial, so this is all ready for in-game. I've actually already tested it and grabbed screenshots. So here you can see that the material is properly applied for a specular and a rim light. You can see the rim, it's very subtle, but you can see it on the edge of the model here. You can see it on the hat here. You can see it on this side pretty clearly, and right here it's actually pretty strong. And you can also see the specular working as well on the armor pauldron. Now, this is a glitched out screenshot, unfortunately. I don't know why it does that sometimes, but it does. It's just because the tool I use to take screenshots is like from 2008, so I guess it's pretty old. But you can see the rim pretty clearly on the hat here. Goes all the way down. You can see it on the arm right here. You can see the specular on the chainmail. So the materials and shaders for this particular instance actually worked pretty well. The problem being, depending on which pack you actually take from, the effects might not come out specifically the way you want. So best course of action is to actually take your materials and shaders from a pack that has the effect that you're actually going for, because some Smash 3 packs have different materials and shaders than other ones, even though previously in the tutorial I said that mostly they're reused. Some of them are different and are reused for specific character sets, like Hyrule character or Zelda characters, for example, use their own. Fire Emblem characters, actually, I don't recall if they have unique ones, but for the most part, a lot of it is reused. And you can pull from basically anyone. I recommend Meta Knight just because it comes out pretty clean. I haven't actually sat down and compared them because I'm a scrub. So, and when I say that, I mean compare the materials and shaders between multiple Smash 3 models. So, I mean, just feel free to experiment in that regard, I suppose. But the other thing I want to show you is that if you have, let's just for the sake of example, let's assume that the only things you have for your texture are the diffuse and, well, actually it would just be the diffuse in this case. So this, you expand your material, this is all you have. And you want to make, instead of making this just a simple, like you replace this with a two-step, and you make this body, and this makes it a flat texture with just the edge, with no specular. Which is fine. If that's what you're going for, then hell yeah, go with that. But you also need to set up the appropriate shader. So in this case, you can select the MDLO. Ooh, interesting. Select the MDLO, press Control H, and this will add a new shader. Keep in mind that the metals are still here. That's what this EXT MTL is. These are the metal materials, and the shaders 2 through 4 are the metal shaders. So you can actually just delete those if you want. I'm going to delete this one too, actually. And then Control H. So we got shader 2 here. And we're going to place this with our two-step shader. And we're going to make the body use that one. And now you can see, well, once I actually change this to true, you can see that now the rim, it's very subtle and basically impossible to see, but it is there. You can actually see it pretty, well, you could. Let's see if I can find a place here that has it. I don't know, point being, oh, there, on the face. You can see it right here. So now it's just flat, it doesn't have a specular. Very subtle. The way you would go about strengthening it, couldn't tell you at the moment. Actually, I've never had to do that, but, you know, because I'm a scrub, but regardless. Now, let's assume from the opposite end that you have just your diffuse, like this, and you actually want to add a specular. And I'm pretty sure you can guess where I'm going with this, but you essentially just import your 4-step, and actually, let's take this a step further. Let's go back to the 2-step here. Let's select this body. Now, let's say that you have multiple objects here that all use the same map, and in this case, it's the body. They all share the same map. Now, let's assume that you want some of these to not be specular and others to have specular. And you could do this by essentially creating 2 unique materials. So I could just go ahead and create a material here. I forgot to delete these. We can move it up. You can hold Control and use the arrows to move it. And we can name this fit link body spec. And this we could just name it diff. So now we have 2 separate materials. Actually, well, we will in a moment here. Replace it with a 4-step. You set your shit up here. Whoops. Spec. True. Oh, well, okay, you'll have to change that in a moment. I'll show you why. You also want to change your shader from shader, whatever it was. Was it shader 0? I think it was. You want to change it to whatever shader is your specular shader. A quick way of checking that is checking the texture references here under shader data. Basically, the numbers of the number of texture references set to true is basically the amount of textures being used by the shader. So, for example, shader 0 has 3, and that's because all the eye materials use 3 texture references. So for our example, we have 4, so we could just say, okay, this one has 3, it's not that one. 2 has 2, so it's not that one, so it's shader 1. We just set it to shader 1. You know, probably pretty easy to guess based on my actions here, but regardless. So now we have 2 separate materials here for different functions. This one has no specular, this one does have specular. And from here we can change some stuff that some stuff here. For one, the face should not skin usually doesn't have a specular unless you're like a super greasy person. So this would use the diffuse. Same goes for the tunic. The tunic should not have specular, because clothing usually doesn't shine unless it's like a silk or something like that. And you know, once you get into more specific stuff like that, you'll know what you want to do with it. Chainmail you do want to have specular, so we set that. The earring, why not? It's plastic, I guess. Extra. It's mostly metal and 1 small dot. Okay. So we want that to be specular. Not the face. Now this is tricky, because leather usually does have a specular. It's usually very dull, but it does. But then this is cloth here. So, I mean, I just personally don't care, and I'm going to use that. Also, don't worry if your material isn't rendering properly here. I don't know why it does that, but hey, whatever, it does. For hair, you can actually make a 3rd specular material up here, and just name it like fit, link, body, hair, or whatever your naming convention will be, and take one of the hair speculars from another Smash 3 pack with an effect, a similar effect that for what you're going for. You can really, if you want to, you can dig into the shader, the existing shaders, and figure out what controls what. Like for example, this right here is the diffuse itself. This right here is the edge, and from here you can say, like, for example, you can multiply by 4, and that will change it in certain ways. Like you can see, it's like super bright now, which really is not the effect we were going for. Put that to say 1, see what it does. Now it's like super dull, so maybe it's reverse. Set it to 2. Okay, wait, hang on. Regardless, it's kind of besides the point. You could basically just play around with the shader settings. Anything like text map 2, text map 0 through 3, 0, 1, 2, 3. Pretty self-explanatory. But yeah, back to what I was saying. You can just set to whatever it is that you want to use the specular. You can set to use that material. And anything that you want to be using diffuse, you can set it to diffuse. Whatever. This is just actually, yeah, that should be basically it. And from here, you want to go back into your specular material and set these to true, even though they both already are somehow. I don't remember setting that. Maybe I did already. Regardless, that's basically it. You could get as complicated as you want with this, really. There's really no bounds. Well, no, I'm sure there is, but, there's only so many wizards willing to actually go that deep. And really, this is just like, if you don't really feel like dealing with with that aspect, the more complicated shader importing and like building and all that, you can really just do what I outlined here. And in summary, you just export the materials and shaders that you want. You import and rather actually the material shaders and the texture, the edge, and if you're using one, the specular. You import the textures, and you replace your existing materials with the materials you exported previously. You rename your texture references. They have to be case sensitive, by the way. If you capitalize this B, for example, it still works in Brawlbox, but in game, it won't render properly. See, now it's, well, I don't know. It works in Brawlbox, but it breaks in game, so just keep that in mind. So you rename your text references, and that's basically it. You replace your shaders, and you save and test in game, and that's the gist. So yeah, if you have any questions, comments, feel free to contact me on Discord. Probably not going to answer you anywhere else. Again, this is Moblin, and thank you for watching.